About that second aspect, public good regionalism, I guess André has also already mentioned it. The EU acts more or less as a federal entity. You have indeed two visions here. One is that at the end of the day, this is a process that will lead to a new federal state. Not many people will adhere to that point of view, but still it exists. And for instance, I think 2 years ago, the former Belgian Prime Minister wrote a little book with the title, The United States of Europe. And the other vision is then that it stays intergovernmental. The issue is that there is an ongoing and unsolved debate between these two visions, which is even more complicated by the fact that from the moment that states create this common infrastructure, that infrastructure develops its own ideas, its own dynamics, and states somehow lose control over it, partly. And this is part of the European Commission's history and the European institutions' history that I think has not been written too much. Just one example. At some point, there was an idea tabled by the people from within the European institutions to say, let's have a European flag. The head of states said, no, flags, that's something for countries, for states. The European Union should not have its own flag. Okay, proposal rejected. Then the Commission came up with a second proposal. Yeah, but you know, every decent organization has its own logo. So please, can we at least have our own logo? That was accepted. And then there was somewhere a brilliant guy in the Commission said, wait a moment, if we now print the logo on textile, who can prevent us from doing that? And so in a way, there is a flag, but you cannot officially call it a flag. This is just an anecdote, or almost serious things, I guess. About public goods, André mentioned about labor market integration, liberalization, that it is still very limited at the EU, which is quite right. Nevertheless, if you compare it with other regional integration schemes, then the EU is pretty much advanced. This brings us to the third dimension, the global activeness, the third dimension of statehood properties that can be the subject of integration. Here we have to say that security issues play an important role. We are no longer talking only about economic issues, but also about security. And I think since the Lisbon Treaty, we have now very clearly a unique position for the EU. First of all, because now the EU has its own legal personality, but also because it created a number of instruments, and there is a history that goes before that, but more. One of the instruments is, for instance, the idea of the European External Action Service, which will mean that soon we will have a couple of thousand diplomats of the EU all over the world. By the way, this is the moment to tell you something about visions. We should not forget that originally the EU had its own security vision. The idea was to make it, after the Second World War, to make it impossible to have war between the major member states, at the time France and Germany. So yes, there is a lot to say about economics, but behind that, and economics was more or less the tool that was used by the initiators, Schuman and Jean Monnet and the others, as a tool to come to this security vision, not economy. I believe that if we think about can the EU be a model for other regions in the world, that perhaps rather than starting from the economic issues, we should indeed start again from security issues and see what role regional organizations in different parts of the world can play from a security perspective. Which is, by the way, I'm talking now as a member of the United Nations organization, which is, by the way, totally in tune with the UN, because the UN's charter foresees the possibility of regional organizations to play a role in global security complexes. However, just to tell you that what is happening in Europe again is not kind of panacea, it's not the best of the world. Just let me give you an idea of how security issues are managed within Europe by different regional organizations. And you get this kind of spaghetti ball picture spaghetti ball, because that is sometimes how regional trade arrangements are called in the rest of the world, also for security issues here, so there is still a lot of work to go. How much am I doing with the time? Is it still okay?
You still have 6 minutes.
Oh, great. This then brings me to some issues at a more global level that I think will influence, if not weaken, the ambitions of the EU. Because indeed the ambitions of the EU at this moment are very clear. They want to become a recognized global player. Soft power is a concept often used, but also by military interventions. By the way, at this moment, the EU, together with its member states, is the largest donor in UN development aid already. So there is a whole program there. But however, I think that we have to take into account that there are two things happening at a general level that will make this ambition very difficult. The first is the shift in economic gravity that we are witnessing, let's say, from the west to the east. And the other one is the decline of the European demography. And I have some tables to support this, which I will only use very quickly. Basically, the idea is that the share of Europe in the world is going down, is declining. Here you have a prognosis for 2050, which shows you quite clearly that the rest of the world is rising. And if the rest of the world is rising, then the European share is, of course, going down. It's here within the G8 mentioned. The same is happening for Europe. You have a declining population in Europe and in North America, and it gives this intriguing trend extrapolation for 2030, where what is tabled or written here as the rest of the world is actually North America, Canada included, Europe and Oceania, Australia and New Zealand. Indeed, as André already pointed out, one of the major problems is that at this point, in all the global institutions, Europe, and by extension the West, is overrepresented, and this has to be tackled in some way. Now, finally, something about the challenges ahead. There seems to be, among political scientists, a kind of growing consensus that the world is now moving towards multipolarity. Basically, the idea is for many years we lived in a bipolar world order, East and West. That was unchanged. We had a short period of unipolarity with the US, and now with the emergence of the BRICS, we have some kind of multipolarity. And the underlying question is, that is a good thing. Two remarks from my side. First, I would like to recall the famous, paraphrase the famous sentence of Mark Twain, and say that the rumors about the death of the US are grossly over-exaggerated. The United States are still a very important economic and military power, and we have to take that in mind. Secondly, I'm not sure that the BRICS as such will become poles, each of them. It could well be that we are moving to another, or to a new bipolar world, which is constituted out of the EU and, slip of the tongue, Freudian slip of the tongue, of the US and China. Another possibility, which is floated by some colleagues recently, is that we are moving to a kind of regiopolarity world, meaning that we have a number of regional security and economical integrated systems. And if that could be the case, and there is some evidence for that, that would mean indeed that there is room for experiments that, of course, do not copy the European model, but that at least can learn from Europe, and that we could go to a world that is composed of regional entities that take care of their own security issues first and for all, that take care of their own economic independence, and that then try to interact. Of course,